Have you seen the mortgage statement that came in yesterday's mail, Jake? I asked, keeping my voice casual as I leaned against the kitchen doorframe. My husband's shoulders stiffened momentarily before he continued stirring his coffee with exaggerated focus. That single involuntary reaction told me everything I needed to know. The statement I'd found buried beneath a stack of junk mail that morning might as well have been written in another language. I'd stared at the numbers, certain there must be some mistake. A $250,000 loan against our home, a loan I knew nothing about. A loan that required my signature, which meant, my name is Emma Lawson, and until yesterday I thought I knew my husband better than anyone in the world. Jake and I had been married for 14 years, with twin 10-year-old daughters who were the center of our universe. We had built what I considered a beautiful life together. A comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district, vacations to the beach every summer, and the kind of easy companionship that comes from growing into adulthood alongside someone you trust completely. That trust was now crumbling like sand through my fingers as I watched Jake avoid my eyes. "It's just some refinancing," he finally mumbled, still not looking up. "Market rates were good. I was going to tell you about it." The lie hung between us, as palpable as the steam rising from his coffee mug. In 14 years of marriage, Jake had never once handled our finances without meticulous discussion. We decided everything together. That was our rule. The only reason to break that rule would be if he had something to hide. "Jake," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake beginning inside me. "That document shows a $250,000 loan against our house, a loan I never signed for, so either someone forged my signature or you're lying to me right now." He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. Fear, shame. The kind of desperate, cornered look I'd never seen on my husband's face before. "I can explain," he started, but then fell silent. "I'm listening," I said, crossing my arms and leaning back against the doorframe to steady myself. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the morning light harsh and exposing. But Jake just shook his head, placed his coffee mug on the counter with shaking hands, and walked past me without another word. I heard the front door close moments later, the sound of his car starting, then pulling away. Running. My steady, dependable Jake was running away rather than facing me. I stood frozen in our suddenly empty house, the mortgage statement clutched in my hand, feeling as though the floor beneath me might give way at any moment. The twins would be home from their sleepover at my mother's in a few hours. I had until then to figure out what the hell was going on. Jake's home office had always been something of a sacred space, not because he demanded privacy, but because I respected his need for a place to decompress after long days managing the regional sales team at his company. We'd never been the type of couple to snoop through each other's things. Trust had always been the bedrock of our relationship. That trust lay shattered now as I unlocked his desk drawer with the spare key we kept in the kitchen junk drawer. My hands trembled slightly, partly from anger, partly from fear of what I might find. The drawer slid open to reveal a chaotic mess of papers, nothing like the methodical organization Jake usually maintained. Bank statements, casino receipts, loan applications. My signature, practiced and forged with unsettling accuracy, appeared on document after document. I felt physically ill as I sorted through them, piecing together a story so completely foreign to the life I thought we'd been living. The casino receipts went back months. Atlantic City, Foxwoods, online gambling sites I'd never heard of, thousands upon thousands of dollars flowing out in a steady stream I'd somehow been completely blind to. How had I missed this? I handled our household budget, paid our bills, balanced our accounts. There shouldn't have been enough wiggle room in our finances for this kind of spending without setting off alarm bells. And yet, here was the evidence. Jake had been living a double life, one I hadn't glimpsed even the faintest shadow of until now. The front door opened just as I uncovered a folded letter from a payday loan company threatening legal action. Heavy footsteps in the hallway told me Jake had returned, perhaps realizing that running away would only make things worse. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway of his office, his face ashen as he took in the scattered documents before me. "How much?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "How much have you lost?" Jake swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. For a moment, I thought he might turn and walk out again. Instead, he sank into the chair across from the desk, a man collapsing under an invisible weight. "About $120,000, he finally said, the words barely audible. The number hit me like a physical blow. $120,000. Gone, gambling debts, and a $250,000 loan against our house that I hadn't known about until today. "And the rest of the loan?" I managed to ask. "I needed it," Jake said, a desperate edge to his voice. "I'm so close to turning things around, Emma. There's this system I've been developing. If I can just get back to even, we'll be fine. Better than fine. I can make this right." I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man I'd married. This hollow-eyed stranger with his frantic justifications and promises was unrecognizable to me. "You forged my signature," I said, holding up one of the loan documents. "You lied to me. For months. Years. How long has this been going on, Jake?" He looked away, and in that moment of avoidance, I had my answer. This wasn't new. This was a secret he'd been keeping for a very long time. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "But you did," I replied, my voice breaking for the first time. "You've put everything we've built at risk. Our home, our children's security, our future." "I'm going to fix it," he insisted, leaning forward. "I just need a little more time. Please, Emma, don't do anything rash." I gathered the documents into a neat pile, my mind racing ahead to what needed to happen next. The twins would be home soon. Life would need to continue somehow, even as the foundation beneath it had turned to quicksand. "We'll talk about this later," I said, standing up. "Right now, I need to think." I walked past him, documents clutched to my chest, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at him right now. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. On the surface, we maintained a semblance of normalcy for the twins' sake. Jake went to work. I managed the girls' school and activities schedule. We orbited each other in our home like distant planets, exchanging only the most necessary information in carefully neutral tones. At night, when Jake thought I was asleep, I'd hear him pacing in his office, the soft murmur of his voice as he made phone calls he clearly didn't want me to overhear. I lay awake beside him in bed later, watching the ceiling, feeling the vast emotional chasm that had opened between us. By the fourth morning, I couldn't maintain the pretense any longer. I waited until the twins had left for school, then confronted Jake in the kitchen. "I need to know everything," I said. "No more lies, no more hiding. I deserve the whole truth." Jake sighed heavily, the dark circles under his eyes testament to his own sleepless nights. "Where do you want me to start?" "The beginning. When did this start? The gambling." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of weariness I'd seen countless times before, but which now seemed like that of a stranger. "College?" he finally said. "It started in college. Just poker games with the guys at first. I was good at it, Emma. Really good. I could read people, calculate odds. I won more than I lost." I nodded, remembering how he'd sometimes mentioned those games, though he'd always described them as low-stakes fun among friends. Nothing serious. "After we got married, I stopped for a while," he continued. "But then, about 5 years ago, work got really stressful with the merger and all the layoffs, and I started playing online poker to unwind. It was just a way to relax at first. 5 years, 5 years of secrets, while I thought we were sharing everything." "And then?" I prompted when he fell silent. "And then I hit a losing streak. I kept thinking I just needed one good win to get back to even. I started borrowing money, credit cards at first, then cash advances, then—" He gestured vaguely, indicating the mess we were now in. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. the question that had been burning inside me since the moment I'd found that mortgage statement. Jake's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, honest. I was ashamed, he said simply. I kept thinking I could fix it before you ever had to know. I never wanted to disappoint you. And now? He looked down at his hands. I don't know how to fix this, Emma. I've tried to stop. So many times. But then I convinced myself that if I can just win big once, I can make everything right. In that moment, understanding dawned with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about the money, the lies, the betrayal of trust. Jake had an addiction, one he couldn't control, one he couldn't overcome through willpower alone. You need help, I said, gentler now. Professional help. This isn't something you can beat on your own. But as quickly as that moment of vulnerability had appeared, it vanished. Jake's expression hardened, pride and denial reasserting themselves. I don't need some shrink telling me I have a problem, he said dismissively. I just need a little time to turn things around. I know what I'm doing. I stared at him, incredulous. You've lost $120,000, Jake. You've taken out a loan against our house without my knowledge. You've forged my signature on legal documents. How can you possibly say you have things under control? You don't understand how this works, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd never heard directed at me before. In gambling, you have to weather the downswings to get to the upswings. I'm due for an upswing. I felt something shift inside me then, the last remnants of blind faith in the man I'd married giving way to clear-eyed reality. Jake wasn't just hiding his addiction, he was deep in denial about it. And that made him dangerous, to himself, to me, to our children's future. I want you to leave, I said quietly. His head snapped up. What? Not forever, I clarified, though I wasn't certain of that anymore. But I need space to think, and you need to decide if you're willing to get help. Really get help, Jake. Because I can't live like this, and I won't let the twins grow up watching their father self-destruct. You're overreacting, he said, anger flashing in his eyes. This is still my house, too. Is it? I countered. Because from what I can tell, you've gambled away your claim to it. Either you leave voluntarily for a while, or I take the girls and go. Your choice. We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the space between us stretching wider with each passing second. Finally, Jake's shoulders slumped in defeat. I'll pack a bag, he said. But this isn't over, Emma. We're not over. I watched him walk away, wondering if that was true, wondering if anything would ever be the same again. He did what? Lisa's voice rose sharply, drawing glances from nearby tables in the quiet cafe where we'd met for lunch the following day. My best friend since college, Lisa had always been my rock during difficult times. I needed her steady presence now more than ever. I shushed her, glancing around self-consciously. Keep your voice down, please. The last thing I need is this becoming neighborhood gossip. Lisa leaned forward, lowering her voice, but not the intensity of her outrage. I'm sorry, but I'm having a hard time processing this. Jake, our Jake, Mr. Responsible, took out a secret loan and has been gambling away your savings? Are we talking about the same person? I nodded wearily, stirring my untouched coffee. I'd barely slept since Jake had packed a bag and gone to stay with his brother 2 days earlier. Trust me, I'm having trouble believing it myself. What are you going to do? Lisa asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe him when he says he can fix this, that it's just a rough patch, but another part, the rational part, Lisa interjected. Yes, the rational part knows this is serious, that he needs help he's not willing to get right now. Lisa's expression softened. I love Jake. You know I do. He's been like family to me for 14 years. But this isn't just a bad decision or a mistake. This is addiction, and it's not going to magically get better without professional intervention. I nodded again, tears threatening. I'd been holding myself together for the twins' sake, maintaining the fiction that their dad was away on a business trip. But here with Lisa, the careful facade was beginning to crack. You need to protect yourself, Lisa continued gently, and the girls, legally and financially. I don't even know where to start, I confessed. I'm terrified of what might happen if I look too closely at our finances. What else might I find? What if there are more loans, more debts I don't know about? Lisa set down her coffee cup with a decisive clink. I know someone who can help, Rebecca Carter. She's a family law attorney, but she specializes in cases involving addiction and financial infidelity. She helped my cousin Jen when her husband's spending spiraled out of control. Let me call her. I hesitated, the word attorney making everything suddenly frighteningly real. Taking legal steps meant acknowledging that my marriage might not survive this crisis, that the life Jake and I had built together might be unsalvageable. But what choice did I have? The twins' security, their college funds, the roof over their heads, was at stake. I couldn't gamble with their future the way Jake had. Okay, I said finally. Set up the meeting. Rebecca Carter's office was nothing like the intimidating wood-paneled space I'd imagined. Instead, it was bright and modern, with comfortable seating and framed children's artwork on the walls. The attorney herself was equally surprising, younger than I'd expected, with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. Emma, I'm so glad you came in, she said, gesturing for me to take a seat. Lisa filled me in on some of the basics, but I'd like to hear the situation from you, if that's all right. For the next hour, I poured out the whole messy story. The discovery of the loan, the confrontation with Jake, the uncovering of his gambling addiction. Rebecca listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to talk uninterrupted. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression compassionate but focused. First, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Financial infidelity tied to addiction is something I see frequently, and there are clear steps we can take to protect you and your children. I don't want to divorce Jake, I said quickly. At least I don't think I do. I just want to make sure the twins and I are safe while he gets the help he needs. Rebecca nodded. I understand, and divorcing isn't necessarily the first or only option, but we do need to take immediate action to separate your finances and create some legal guardrails. She outlined a plan that made my head spin with its implications, yet also provided the first real sense of control I'd felt since finding that mortgage statement. First, you need to open a separate bank account in your name only, Rebecca advised. Transfer any direct deposits from your job there. Next, we'll file for a legal separation, which will protect you from any new debts Jake incurs, while still keeping your marriage intact. We'll also need to pull both your credit reports to get a complete picture of the financial situation. I nodded, taking notes despite the surreal feeling that this couldn't possibly be my life. Though I understand that might not be a step you're ready to take against yourself. The thought of filing fraud charges, despite everything, they'll restructure rather than pursue legal action. It depends on the lender and the specific circumstances. My head was swimming with information, possibilities, consequences. This is all so overwhelming, I admitted. Rebecca's smile was gentle but firm. One step at a time. Today, let's focus on opening that separate account and getting the legal separation paperwork started. The rest we can tackle as we go. I left her office an hour later with a detailed action plan and my first appointment with a forensic accountant scheduled for the following week. The weight on my shoulders hadn't lifted. If anything, it had become more defined, more real. But at least now I had a path forward. A way to protect myself and my daughters while Jake either found his way back to us or continued down his self-destructive path. That evening, as I was helping the twins with their homework, my phone lit up with Jake's name. He'd been texting regularly since moving to his brother's place, mostly brief check-ins about the girls or logistical matters. This time, though, the message made my blood run cold. I need access to our savings account, just temporarily. There's a situation I can turn around, but I need cash right away. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The audacity took my breath away. After everything that had happened, he was still looking for money to gamble, still caught in the same destructive cycle, unable or unwilling to break free. I stared at the message, anger and heartbreak warring within me. Part of me wanted to call him, to scream, and demand how he could possibly think this was an appropriate request. Another part recognized the desperation behind the words, the illness driving him to ask his betrayed wife for more money to pay his addiction. I set the phone down without responding and turned my attention back to Lily's map, determined not to let the twins see how shaken I was. Later, after they were in bed, I typed a simple response. No. I've consulted an attorney and am taking steps to protect our family finances. I'm here when you're ready to get help. His reply came almost instantly. You got a lawyer? Are you serious, Emma? This is between us. You're making everything worse. I could almost hear the panic in his words. The realization that I wasn't going to enable him anymore. That the consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him. This stopped being just between us when you forged my signature and put our home at risk, I texted back. I'm doing what I need to do to protect the girls. A long pause followed, then, I never meant for any of this to happen. I stared at those words, thinking of all the small choices, the little lies that had led us to this breaking point. I believed him. He hadn't set out to destroy our family, but intention and impact were very different things. I know, I replied finally, but it did happen, and now we have to deal with it. I set my phone aside after that, ignoring the subsequent buzzing that indicated more messages arriving. Whatever Jake had to say, it could wait until morning. I needed rest if I was going to continue functioning for our daughter's sake. As I lay in our bed, too large and empty without him beside me, I wondered what would happen next. If he would finally recognize the severity of his addiction and seek help. If our marriage could survive this breach of trust, even with professional intervention. If the girls would emerge from this crisis unscathed or carry the wounds of their father's addiction into their own adult relationships. So many questions without answers. So many possible futures branching out from this single devastating moment of discovery. All I knew for certain was that I couldn't go back to the blissful ignorance of before. The only way was forward into whatever unknown lay ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved through the steps Rebecca had outlined with robotic precision. I opened a separate bank account. I met with the forensic accountant who uncovered even more gambling debts hidden in obscure credit cards and online payment systems. I filed for legal separation, my hands shaking as I signed the papers. All the while, Jake alternated between desperate pleas for another chance and angry accusations that I was overreacting, making a mountain out of a molehill. He couldn't seem to understand that his addiction had already created the mountain. I was merely acknowledging its existence. The twins, perceptive as always, knew something was wrong despite my efforts to shield them. When is Dad coming home from his trip? Lily asked one evening as I tucked them into bed. I'm not sure, sweetheart, I answered, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. He has some important things to take care of first. Is it because he's sick? Her twin sister Zoe asked from the other bed. I froze, wondering what they might have overheard. What makes you say that? Zoe shrugged. I heard you talking to Aunt Lisa. You said Dad has an addiction. That's like being sick, right? Like when Uncle Mike couldn't stop drinking and had to go to the special hospital. My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. Of course they would make that connection. Lisa's brother Mike had gone through rehab for alcoholism the previous year, and we'd explained his absence to the girls in age-appropriate terms. Yes, I said carefully, sitting down on the edge of Zoe's bed. Dad does have an addiction. It's not the same as Uncle Mike's, but it is a kind of sickness, and like any sickness, he needs the right kind of help to get better. But he will get better, right? Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. I wished more than anything that I could promise them that, yes, their father would get help, would recover, would return to being the dad they knew and adored. But I couldn't lie to them. I hope so, I said instead. We all want Dad to get better. But right now, he has to decide that he wants help. We can't make that choice for him. The girls exchanged glances, having one of those silent twin communications that had fascinated me since their birth. We could make him a card, Lily suggested. Tell him we want him to get better. Maybe that would help him decide. My throat tightened with emotion. That's a beautiful idea. We can do that tomorrow. As I kissed them goodnight and turned out the light, I marveled at their resilience, their simple faith in the power of love and encouragement. If only addiction were so easily conquered. Downstairs, I found 3 more missed calls and a text from Jake on my phone. The text was different from his previous messages. No demands or accusations, just a simple request. Please call me. I need to talk to you. Something in the brevity, the lack of defensive posturing, made me dial his number despite the late hour. He answered on the first ring. Emma, he said, his voice rough as though he'd been crying. Thank you for calling back. What is it, Jake? I asked, too emotionally drained for pleasantries. A long pause, filled with the sound of his uneven breathing. Then, I hit rock bottom today. I sold my car to pay off a bookie. I've been sleeping on Tom's couch for 2 weeks. The firm put me on administrative leave because I've been missing meetings. Another pause. I need help, Emma. I can't do this anymore. I sank onto the living room sofa, relief and caution warring within me. This was what I'd been hoping to hear, but I'd been disappointed by Jake's promises before. What kind of help? I asked carefully. Real help, he replied. There's an inpatient treatment center in Hartford that specializes in gambling addiction. Tom found it. It's a 60-day program. I called them today, and they have an opening next week. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to feel a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. That's good, Jake. That's a really good first step. Will you? His voice faltered. Will you bring the girls to see me before I go in? I need to explain, to tell them myself why I'll be away. I don't want them thinking I abandoned them. I thought of the cards they were planning to make him tomorrow, their innocent hope for his recovery. Yes, we can do that. But Jake, you need to be honest with them, in an age-appropriate way. No more lies. I promise, he said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard genuine resolve in his voice. No more lies, to any of you, ever again. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room for a long time, trying to sort through my tangled emotions. Relief that Jake was finally seeking treatment. Lingering anger at the damage he'd caused. Fear about our financial future and the mountain of debt we now faced. Uncertainty about whether our marriage could survive even if Jake's recovery was successful. The legal separation would proceed regardless. The financial protections Rebecca had put in place would remain. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be instantly restored by a single decision to seek help, no matter how necessary or overdue. But it was a start, a glimmer of possibility where before there had been only darkness and denial. The meeting with the twins went better than I'd dared hope. Jake, looking exhausted but clear-eyed, explained in simple terms that he had been making bad choices with money because of something called gambling addiction, and that he needed to go to a special hospital to learn how to make better choices. The girls had questions, of course, but Jake answered each one with an honesty I hadn't seen from him in too long. Will you come home after the hospital? Zoe asked, always the one to cut straight to what mattered most. Jake glanced at me, then back to our daughter. I hope so, sweetheart, but that will be up to Mom. I heard her trust in a big way, and earning that back will take time and a lot of hard work on my part. I was surprised by his answer, the lack of presumption, the acknowledgement of the damage done. It was the response of someone beginning to grapple with reality rather than hiding from it. The girls presented him with their handmade cards, covered in glitter and heartfelt messages of love and encouragement. Jake's hands trembled as he read them, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve you guys," he whispered, gathering the twins into a tight hug. "But I'm going to work really hard to be the dad you deserve." Later, after the girls had gone to play in the backyard, Jake and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the scene of our first confrontation a lifetime ago. "I appreciate you letting me see them," he said quietly. "And I understand why you needed to take the legal steps you did. I don't blame you for any of it." I nodded, still guarded despite the apparent change in his attitude. "What happens after treatment, Jake?" 60 days isn't a magical cure. Recovery is an ongoing process. "I know," he said, meeting my gaze steadily. "The program includes outpatient therapy, support groups, financial counseling. I'll need to continue all of that, and—" He hesitated. "I know I have a lot to make up for. The debt, the betrayal of trust. I understand if you can't forgive me, Emma, but I hope you'll give me the chance to try to make things right." I studied his face, searching for any sign of the manipulative behavior I'd seen over the past weeks. Instead, I saw only pain, remorse, and a fragile hope. "I can't make any promises right now," I said honestly. "I need to see real, sustained change, not just words." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "That's fair? More than fair, after what I've put you through?" As I watched him say goodbye to the twins before leaving with his brother for the treatment center, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first step toward it. A willingness to leave the door open just a crack, to allow for the possibility of redemption. The road ahead would be long and difficult. The financial damage would take years to repair. The legal separation would remain in place until I was certain Jake's recovery was stable and sustainable. Trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, painfully, one day at a time. But for the first time since finding that mortgage statement, I allowed myself to imagine a future where our family might be whole again. Different, certainly, changed by the experience of addiction and betrayal. But perhaps, eventually, stronger for having weathered the storm together. As I stood on the porch with the twins, waving goodbye to Jake, I thought about the countless other families facing similar battles across the country. The silent epidemic of gambling addiction, enabled by easy online access and aggressive marketing. The shame that kept so many sufferers from seeking help until they'd destroyed the very foundations of their lives. Jake turned back for one last look before getting into his brother's car. Our eyes met across the lawn, a moment of perfect understanding passing between us. This wasn't the end of our story. It was merely the end of a chapter, one filled with secrets and pain. What came next would be determined by choices yet to be made, day by day, moment by moment. The future remained unwritten, but at least now, we were all facing it with open eyes.